I want to talk first about why this decision was so bad and such an overreach. And that is radical, dangerous, pernicious. And I added one this morning. It's also intentional. This is the deliberate, intentional result of years of planning by the corporate web. So it's a really, really, really bad thing. It's a tip of the iceberg. We have to address it. And then I want to talk a little bit about what sort of a call to action, what motivates us. I think once in a generation, we're at a moment of time where we're really called to look at what our core values are and look at what it means to stand up for those core values. And I really think we're in one of those times. And I think that's why it's so important to organize around this and understand the context in which we're organizing is really to fight back against corporate takeover of democracy. And then I will review briefly, because I think Craig is going to go into a little bit more detail about some of the remedies that there are. There's a range of things that can be done. And then we will then hopefully move on and organize. Okay, so first, radical, dangerous, pernicious, and deliberate. What do I mean? The decision was radical because what the court did in the Citizens United case is reach out to decide an issue it didn't have to decide on the merits issues that had not been briefed, for which there was no record made below. And it did it because it could. It did it because when Alito replaced Sandra Day O'Connor on the court, the conservative majority had the votes to do what they had been wanting to do, which is open up our elections to corporate power, to permit corporations in, to basically put a price tag on our democracy. And they did it. They seized the moment. There were many other things they could have done. They didn't have to decide this facial constitutionality of the campaign finance law and open up our elections to unlimited corporate contributions to influence those elections. Okay? They could have decided it on much narrower grounds. Folks probably know this decision came out of a documentary called Hillary the Movie. They could have decided this was a documentary. It didn't come under the electioneering laws that they were looking at. They could have decided that because it was a nonprofit funded almost entirely by individual contributions, they didn't even reach the statutory question of whether corporations could make contributions to influence elections. Or they could have decided on as applied the decision, the law was unconstitutional. And so say, if it's used this way, it's unconstitutional, but left the law intact. They didn't do that. They took the radical decision to overturn on facial grounds this constitutional principle that had been embedded in two previous Supreme Court decisions. So it was radical. It was clear. That was the overreach. That was the overreach. Okay. It's dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because of what people have talked about this morning, which is it clearly unleashed a huge amount of money onto the elections, opening up corporate treasuries to spend unlimited amounts of money to influence elections. And we heard the figures, somewhere $300, $400 billion, tip of the iceberg in terms of what we're going to see. And a portion of that, and I think Craig will probably talk about that, portion of that is also secret money. It's being funneled through these front organizations. America for Prosperity is the Koch brothers. 60 Plus is Pharma. American Crossroads is Road. These are front groups for major corporate money that can be spent, and where the donors behind it don't have to be disclosed. So not only are they buying the elections, but we can't even figure out who's doing what to hold them accountable. Okay. So more, I think twice as much secret money was spent in the 2010 elections than all of the third-party money spent in the 2006 elections. So this is the tip of the iceberg. And it's not just that they opened the doors legally, they created an environment that encouraged this, that made it okay. Because the Supreme Court had put this in constitutional terms, and put this in terms of corporations' free speech rights, which really, when you think about it, just doesn't make sense. I mean, the notion that a corporation has the exact same rights to free speech as you all sitting there is just absurd. It's absurd, but they did it. They put it behind this banner of, some values around First Amendment, and really encouraged, I think, created an atmosphere in which this spending would take place, and it did. So it was a radical decision. It's dangerous. And let me just one other point I wanted to make on how it's dangerous. We did a quick survey of people with the American Way of the 36 Democrats who voted for health care reform who were voted out in 2010 and took a look at the spending in their races. And about $100 million in total was spent in those races. 9 cents out of every dollar of all of that money that was spent in those elections was spent by the top 20 big corporate front groups who were opposing health care reform. And 20% of all the money spent against these candidates who lost were spent by those large corporate front groups who opposed health care. So it has an impact. The money in these races has an impact. It's very, very dangerous. Pernicious. Why pernicious? Because it goes beyond what I just said. It goes beyond actual money being spent to knock off candidates. It has a chilling effect. You don't even have to spend the money. All you have to do is say you're going to spend it, right? And then it has a chilling effect on what legislators feel comfortable doing. The buzz in the hall. If I do this, they're going to come after me with all this money. Okay? And then one other way in which it's pernicious is, as an organization that's very focused on the makeup of the court, and this 30-year history of people who are Green Party has been advocating for getting progressive justices on the Supreme Court and lower federal court judges. Well, that money that can be spent on elections can be spent on elections to elect the president who will nominate judges, okay, and on senators who will confirm those judges. And those judges are the ones who are sitting on the court in a 5-4 majority deciding to take away our rights as Americans and give it to the corporations. So it's pernicious because it has this chilling effect because you don't even have to spend the money. And because the influence you have is also influence over who runs that third branch of government. So this is a serious problem. Okay? Now, intentional. Why do I say intentional? This didn't happen by accident. We have to understand that this decision is happening in the context of an effort, of organized efforts since the early 70s to build a right-wing corporate infrastructure to influence every branch of our government, to create the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is the corporate rights legislative arm that gives all these state legislatures that are doing all the union busting and the tax on public education and all of that, to give them the model legislation they can use to do it. And they're having impact now because of the turnover in state legislatures. They funded the Heritage Foundation. They funded the Federalist Society. Okay? This has been an organized effort since the early 70s to create the corporate right infrastructure that we now see coming into play, and with Citizens United, it's sort of the tip of that iceberg. So it's been a long time coming, and the rationale that the court used in the Citizens United decision around the free speech was a doctrine that was begun to be talked about in the early 70s, and sort of it developed through a whole chain of litigation designed to empower corporations or protect corporations from being held accountable by using, sort of, among other things, the First Amendment as a justification. So this is not happening by accident. It's happening in the context of extensive building of an infrastructure, and now is the time to act. Now is the time to act. Now here's what I mean about it. When you think about it, once a generation maybe, we're in a moment in time when we really can push back on this corporate power, and we really have an obligation to do so. And I've thought a lot about it, and we think about slavery. Well, that was the defense of an economic institution that a lot of people were employing because it fed an economy. Okay? And fortunately, our leaders had the courage to stand up to that powerful economic interest and fight slavery. You see it again in the progressive movement, the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? When the power of the corporations was very prevalent, and then you got the trust busters, you got the progressive amendments to our Constitution, you got the direct elections of senators, you got the federal income tax, you got legislation being passed because it was a moment in time when the corporate power, we were so endangered that corporate power overwhelming us, people stood up. Flash forward to FDR's time, and the huge, enormous battle he had with the courts over whether or not he could sustain the minimum wage and the ban against child labor and Social Security against an onslaught of attacks from a Supreme Court that was basically controlled by the corporate right. Okay? So, and then flash forward now. And I really think this is our moment in time. there's a great power amassed against us and against American people. And if we don't act now, if we don't try to turn the tide now, I'm not sure when we will have an opportunity to do it, because the courts will become more emboldened, the legislatures will become more packed with the elected officials that this corporate money buys, and it's hard to imagine how we go forward. So I really think this is a critical time. It's a critical time for us to step up and be in that fight. So really quickly, 3 minutes, because I want to. There's lots of things that we can do. My organization, for the American Way, is focusing on a 3-pronged strategy. We're focusing on legislative fixes that in the short term can make a difference. I think we talked about that a little bit here, and hear some more about that. But you can do public financing, which is extremely important. You can do disclosed legislation, so that at least you know where this money is coming from. You can do legislation and or work with some corporations who are going to do this, so that you know, so that there's some requirement that corporate directors, management has to disclose to their shareholders and to the public what contributions they're making, so at least there's some transparency there. There's a range of legislative approaches, all of which have champions in Congress and in similar measures in the states, and something that we should pursue. Those are short-term measures. They're not going to ultimately fix the problem that the Supreme Court wiped away a lot of our ability to legislate in this area. So in that sense, there's 2 other prongs that my organization is focusing on. One is continuing to focus on the court, change the court. There will be future vacancies down the line, and we have to be mindful of those vacancies and understand that who sits in those seats makes a difference. Right? Just as we know, I'm sure many of you may have seen that there was an argument recently in the 4th Circuit on the health care reform, challenging the constitutionality of health care reform. Well, sitting on that panel were 2 Obama-appointed judges, right, and 1 Clinton-appointed judge. It makes a difference. It makes a difference who's nominating those judges. It just makes a difference in terms of how this case is going. And the third thing, and something that, again, this is the starting fight to win fight, is the constitutional amendment. And there's, ultimately, you either have to change the court's view of misguided view of the Constitution, which you saw in Citizens United, or you've got to do a constitutional amendment, because that's how profound, that's how radical what this court did. There's a number of groups that are working on trying to do precisely that. There are amendments that have been introduced, as we heard. It's really, really, really important to keep focus on that, partly because you have to do it really ultimately in order to remedy this, but also it's part of, this is a big problem, and so it needs a big solution. And I think that's probably where we are, and just in terms of understanding the gravity of the situation that we're in. So I think the last point I'd leave you with, if you go to a couple things, if you go to, I didn't bring copies, but if you go to PFAW.org, PFAW.org, we did a survey a while ago that shows the American public are with us. I mean, it's not a surprise. Across party line, across ideology, the American public believes corporate money in politics is a serious problem, and they say, if necessary, enact a constitutional amendment in order to remedy it. So this is, and then this is again, it's 3-to-1 across party line, across how they define themselves with liberal, moderate, or conservative. So I would just urge you to take a look at that. And then just as another resource, I think we left at the front desk, the Government by the People. This is our kind of toolkit for, there's sample resolutions in here, there's sample letters to the editor, there's hopefully the material that you need in order to do what you can do in your local community or share with colleagues around the country. This is also available on our website. Feel free to pick one up on your way out. So I think I'm about done, right? I'm about done. So, so in any event, thank you all for coming out. This is incredible. I do this work. I really breathe this, and seeing this group of people out here committed as well to making something, making progress in this arena is really inspiring and affirming. So thank you for everything that you're doing, and have a good rest of the weekend too.